Well, I may be older than most of you here, but I'm going to go back to childhood. I think all of us have childhood memories, and sometimes something triggers them. And what triggered mine was actually the invitation to speak at this event on bridges. Because one of, oh, that's the wrong slide. One of the earliest memories I have is of being by this riverside, playing in the snow, throwing a snowball, and I threw that snowball into the river, but my new nicely knitted glove stuck to the snowball and it landed in the river as well, but not on the river, but on these little ice floes that you might see behind you there. And I went to my dad and said, my glove is floating down the river. And he said, I can't help you, there's no bridge. So I was aware of already the power of bridges, but the other thing that reminded me of the power of bridges was my glove was floating on the ice floe underneath this bridge, which is a bridge built in 1929 called the Ambassador Bridge. It connects my home city of Windsor, Ontario, with Detroit, Michigan, the Motor City that many of you may have heard of. It's still the busiest border crossing between Canada and the United States. It's changed lives of millions of people. It's a bridge that's made a difference, but it's a bridge that was difficult to build. So fast forward, and since I'm older, 60 years, to where I live now in Glarus in eastern Switzerland. And in July, my wife and I went for a walk in the mountains behind, and then we suddenly found our path, we thought perhaps barred, by this landslide. Fortunately, there was a path across that landslide. We tiptoed across the path and thought, what happens if that falls down? Well, 3 weeks later, we were sleeping, we heard a funny noise, didn't know what it was, and we discovered that at night there had been a huge storm, which we had heard, and that landslide had fallen down. A wall of water, a wall of rocks, had rushed down the valley and broke two of the bridges in our valley. This is one of the bridges that was broken. And there's a lot of bridges being broken right now in the world, whether you talk at the personal level with the difficulties of algorithms that separate people, whether you talk at the society level, whether you talk at the international level. So in my talk, I'm going to try to focus on what makes bridges last longer and how can we rebuild bridges a bit faster. So I'm going to zoom into other parts of my life. I've been lucky enough to start working with the UN at a very young age, actually at 24. But I was 25 when I first flew into Khartoum, and that's what it looked like, where the Blue Nile and the White Nile meet and become the Nile. You can see lots of bridges. And this is the Blue Nile Bridge, which was built in 1907. It is over the Blue Nile. I went across it at least twice a day from my work to where I was living in Khartoum North from Khartoum. And it's a bridge that was partly built as the British colonial project, take things out of Sudan, but it became, as the first bridge, a key part in Sudan opening up as a country. And it ended up bringing prosperity to people and seeding a lot of other bridges. The country I've actually worked the longest in is Pakistan. I've worked twice there, about 8.5 years. In fact, I've lived there longer than any other place except my home country of Canada. There, it's not a literal bridge, it's a metaphorical bridge, but this is a picture of the Khyber Pass, which has been the pass through which for thousands of years people have moved from South Asia to Central Asia. That pass connects Afghanistan and Pakistan. Alexander the Great came through it. When I was both times in Pakistan, there was a vision of how this pass would be used to connect the resources, oil, other things of Central Asia to South Asia and vice versa, and bring prosperity to very poor areas. This didn't happen. In Sudan, this is what looks like when the bridges that were there break. This is the face of women and children in Darfur in 2015. They had just fled from areas in the South Darfur because there was fighting there, and ended up in a place we were visiting, which was supposed to be a showpiece visit, but instead it ended up being a place that was receiving these thousands of people. So that's just the face of the consequence of when bridges break, and that's in Sudan. This is the example from Pakistan. This is an area called Waziristan. Peace has still been elusive in that place. And in Waziristan, this is an example of a school I visited, or what's left of a school in that place. Children went back, they hoped to go to school, there was hope, but peace is elusive. That bridge has not been rebuilt yet. Now, going to more of a macro level, most of my career is with UNDP or with humanitarian coordination or development coordination. In the UNDP incarnation, I was involved right at the beginning with the Human Development Report. And that always was a guardedly optimistic document. It showed progress. But over the last couple of years, half of the poorest have gone backwards. That's a change in development. The World Bank, the most famous of the organizations, has highlighted that there's a reversal of development for the poorest nations. And there's actually someone in East Kivu in Congo, which is about as extreme as anywhere. The other thing I've been deeply involved with has been issues of climate change, going back to 1992 and the Rio conference. And progress has been up and down, but it's only recently that the crisis has got dramatically worse. And that's just a quote from the IPC. So this is the consequences of bridges that maybe could be there, but bridges which are not there, bridges which have been broken for everybody's lives, for the planet as a whole. So some examples, bridges can last, bridges can be strong. I also was fortunate to work in Bhutan from 87 to 90 and visited lots of times, the last time about 10 months ago. This is a bridge built by a great Tibetan Lama called Tongtun Lamo, who lived from 1380 to 1460. So it was built around 1420 or so. He was an innovator. He was an innovator in that he managed to find ways to forge steel, alloy, in remote locations such as this. Innovator in the sense that he engineered ways to make suspension bridges with chains. Innovator in that he mobilized communities to support these bridges. This bridge, has lasted since 1400. I mean, they've improved the railings and things, but the fundamental structure is there. But there's lots of bridges that we have. That's a literal bridge. But if you weren't listening to me now, you might have headphones on and be listening to music. The music that we listen to is a mix of cultures. This is one example from my time in Pakistan. I learned to love Qawwali, which is actually Sufi devotional music, not something you think would be so accessible in other places around the world. But Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, others have made it accessible. I wouldn't say accessible, but they've made it available to people who've enjoyed it. Earlier, in this session, other sessions, and where I lived in Detroit, rap music is a key element of mainstream music. It's integrated with poetry. That's very cross-cultural. So whether it's music that you have from Latin America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, Jamaica, there are bridges that are there. Even in fashion, my little scarf is from Bhutan, woven by a woman who was living in the house next to where we were staying. And that's normal in fashion. So my point is that there are lots of bridges that actually have been built. And we have more bridges now than perhaps we had before. So it should be easier to rebuild bridges. So what are some of these principles on which we need to rebuild a bridge? Well, this is also from my little valley. This bridge is one of the bridges that had fallen down when there was the whoosh from the landslide. But it had good foundations. So they were able to sort of pull it out of the river, able to repair it, paint it up, and put it back in just a few months. So foundations are key. Another little story from my village. I don't know if any of you are Swiss, but I'm from the canton of Glarus, and they have still this traditional political structure which only exists in there and one other canton. It's called the Landsgemeinde. Everybody comes together once a year on the main square of the capital of the canton, and they review the key issues for the canton. They have a book you get before. People vote together. And the main thing is that it's a face-to-face exercise. So the divisions that algorithms create aren't there. It's by no means perfect, but it's a way to overcome the divisions. It's a way to bridge differences between often the right wing or the Greens and others, and it works. The trick is how to scale that up beyond a canton that just has 50,000 people. But I'm going to take you to a country which was actually the first place I worked as a 24-year-old with the United Nations, but which I returned to from 2007 to 2011 as the UN resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator, and it was a terrible time, and some of you here may have been there as well. This is an example of a project that had come up during a period when it looked like there might be some way of bridging the deep, deep divisions, all the bridges that had broken. It was essentially a community center that had been put in a place called Madu. But the war came back, and you can see the consequences of it. The nice UNDP logo, shot up by bullets. But this is about 50 kilometers to the west. This is from 2010, about a year after the war finished in quite a terrible way. But these are people, this is kids who've just got out of a bus. These are kids who were displaced 20 times. These were kids who probably had their relatives killed in front of them in the place where they were trapped at the end of the war. These are kids who were then in a camp for at least 1 year. But this is the kids when they got out of the bus and came home and discovered that their playground equipment was still there, and you can see the joy on their face. I highlight this as it shows, that in some sense, the depth in Sri Lanka there was of community, the priority put on young people's future. And that's a key foundation for building bridges. Of course, you need tools as well. That's one of the principles. The United Nations is a key tool, the General Assembly, which you know about. But beyond that, you've got the role of the specialized agencies, many of them in Geneva, whether it's IOM, ITU, UNHCR, we could go down the list. They make a huge difference, and they're an underutilized tool for building bridges in this world where bridges are being broken. That's a picture of our country team in Pakistan. It's not really known too well, but the UN often has roots at the country level going back 30, 40 years, and there's a lot of quiet influence there that those teams have. That's also a tool that is underutilized. So, if we want to build new bridges, there is some optimism. Going back to my home city, this is what's called the Gordie Howe Bridge. It's under construction. It's a new bridge recognizing the links between Canada and the United States there, and it will be finished in September. It's built for economic reasons, but like any other bridge, it's a bit of an act of faith. Now, it's a bit personal, but in the last a few months, both my parents passed away. My mother just before Christmas, my father in mid-January. And exactly 2 weeks ago, we had the memorial service for them in a little Unitarian church, which we grew up with. And there I realized the connections they had. The connections my father kept to his village, which he was a refugee from when he was 11 years old. My mother's connections to Britain and physio and health work she was. And we need to keep those personal connections and keep them across generations. This is their great-granddaughter at the altar. So I hope this would be one of her first memories. She's probably too young to have it. But nonetheless, you have to draw inspiration from both the family connections and the larger issues that I've talked about. Thank you.